Hi, I'm Caroline Pearce, and this is the Ripple Effect podcast, on which we're doing a series of conversations, discussions, discoveries around the inquiry of difficult conversations. Some people are calling them tricky or brave conversations, so we're embracing all of that. Difficult conversations, the ones that we want to avoid and the ones that we maybe find uncomfortable. And this is the first guest episode. Primarily, they're going to be guest episodes as far as I know at the moment. This is Emily Petty. Emily and I trained in coaching together a few years ago, quite a few years ago now. And Emily works with leaders largely in the charity sector, but across sectors. Her background is in that area, and she's a really excellent leader and coach of leaders. And she came to mind as somebody who is a brilliant coach and has lots of different modalities and trainings, works with different people in very different contexts, and is currently working with a particular kind of toolkit that she's created for difficult conversations. And so I thought she was a great person to start this inquiry with, to go from that space of here is some guidance, because in future episodes we're going to dig into some of the stuff that's really hard about those conversations. And so starting out just with a toolkit, and even though I anticipate that we'll refine that toolkit, I thought Emily was a brilliant person to start with. We first recorded this in August of 2025. I'm now recording the introduction in October of 2025. I don't think that timing makes a huge impact on the conversation, but I always find it really interesting to notice those things. So here we'll go in. This is Emily. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to the new Ripple Effect podcast, talking about tricky conversations, how to have them, what to do with them, why they're important, what happens when we avoid them. In an increasingly divided world where ghosting is often an option, how can we learn the tools to build bridges instead of walls? I'm Caroline Pearce and I'm here with Emily Petty. Welcome, Emily. Emily's a coach who works with this topic daily. Thank you for joining me. Emily, how do you describe you?
Thank you, Caroline, and so lovely to be with you for this conversation. How do I describe me? Great question. So I am a leadership development coach, trainer, and facilitator. But effectively, that's my job title. But what I love to do is to help, or what I do is help teams thrive and love work and have impact by, first of all, helping leaders. So creating spaces where leaders can think for themselves, because for me, that is the key, where if a leader can think for themselves, they can then empower their team to do the same. So I create spaces for leaders, supporting leaders to help them to grow and thrive. And then in turn, obviously they help their teams, but I also work with teams to help them to thrive by facilitating spaces where teams can think together and grow and learn and thrive together. That's how I describe me.
That's really wonderful. And there's so much to unpick, and there's two ways that I can take that conversation. That one of them, I'm curious about your description of leaders and who are leaders in the world that you work with, and the other direction is what draws you to the topic of difficult conversations. So maybe, whichever one feels right first.
I'll start with the leaders. So yes, great question again, because I think we do just use that word leadership, leader, quite easily or without really helping people to understand, what is a leader. So the context that I work in, my background is in the charity sector. So I work predominantly with I'm really aware of the word leaders now, with leaders in the charity sector. And by leaders, the work that I do is pretty much would be with middle managers, I suppose. So people who are not necessarily at the top of the hierarchy, but not necessarily at the bottom, and not that great fan of hierarchy, but it exists. And therefore they are in a position of leadership. And by leadership, I would say that is both the managing people, but it's more the inspirational leadership. It's how we set the vision, how we set the tone, how we set the culture. And what I see with the people that I work with is this idea that they're busy, they've got a lot to do, possibly have operational responsibility. And the first thing they think about when they get to their desk is, what do I need to do? Which email do I need to respond to? How am I going to respond to the needs and the challenges that are coming up from my team, my peers, my boss? They're pulled in all these directions and they don't have time for the leadership bit, which is the where are we heading question. Why are we heading there? What is the best way to get there? And they also, in relation to tricky conversations, they don't have time to have those conversations because their priority is to get the jobs done, get the tasks done. And if they could think differently about the perspective from which they're coming from, they would be able to then prioritize those conversations and prioritize the thinking that's required to be done before having those conversations. So that is the perspective I'm coming from. And I think maybe people don't even think they're a leader. They've got maybe manager in their job title and they don't really think about actually what it is to lead others, to lead vision, to lead direction, to lead culture and ways of being. Like, how do we show up around here? Is that my responsibility? Well, that's the responsibility of a leader, I think.
Yeah, that's incredibly useful. And I really recognize that, like, squashed in the middle person that can sometimes just have so much going on a day-to-day basis, and there's a higher up level of leadership that their kind of leadership remit, when they step away from it, they're like, of course I'm a leader, but actually on a day-to-day basis that's never the thing, or very often is not the thing that just comes up for them, because there's so much other stuff. They're close to the grassroots, they know how important that is, they know how important all the people around them are, and this stuff and the pressures from all the directions, and not necessarily having a huge amount of understanding around them. And yeah, then how and when you're at the top of a tree, there's different pressures, so it's still really, really hard to prioritize those conversations. But when you're right squashed in the middle, like there's this constant kind of consciousness about serving everybody else's thing, and like, if you're to take time away to focus on a conversation that isn't absolutely like blaring red, like, how does that feel? So I'm putting too much what's the word, recognition, I suppose, into your story. But I've been there, and I know lots of people who are in that situation. So as a coach that really works with that on a day-to-day basis, what's the most useful place to start? Is it about going, here are my top tips, or is it like, is there a story around, tell me about you and difficult conversations and why that's a thing that you know about?
Yeah, I suppose the story that comes up over and over again with the clients that I work with. So just linking with what we were just saying, there's this sort of firefighter mode, which they're putting out fires, and we know that actually as a leader they need to be, so say we're taking a forest fire, they need to be in the helicopter, really understanding what is happening with the fire rather than on the ground with a hose. And the other thing that I see is that the leaders I work with would define themselves as kind and caring and compassionate. compassionate people. And they mistake, or they think that in order to be an effective leader, they need to have more authority, to be more directive, to be more assertive. And they think that they don't have the skills to do that. And having a tricky conversation does require some level of kind of assertiveness and clarity and being directive. So the conversations I have with them is that what if you can be kind, which you are, and care deeply for the people that you work with, and also care for yourself, because often that care for others means that they are not caring for themselves. What if you could care for yourself and care for others and have the confidence to know that the most caring, most compassionate thing to do is to challenge and to approach and broach that conversation. So that's when most of the conversations I have start. This belief that you can be kind and warm and you can be assertive and direct. And in fact, one conversation I had quite recently was, I get this kind of collaborative leadership approach, that all makes perfect sense when everything's going well. How do you flip? And I was how do you flip to them having to direct if someone's performance changes? And I was a bit thrown in the moment. Actually, it was a online training session. I was a bit kind of thrown in the moment. I thought, oh, I don't really know. I don't know. Whoa, what do you do? What do you do? But actually, that's not. They're not diametric opposites. And I think we've been conditioned to think that the two can't coexist. And for me, without repeating myself too much, that is the key: is not to see them as opposites, but to see them as critical for having those conversations. So I think that's the driver, the kindness, and that's where the conversation starts for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So how do people do it? How do they know it's the right time? Like what are where would you start when to support somebody to get the positive outcome of the difficult conversation, the tricky conversation, to
yeah. And this is when I sometimes I still feel a bit thrown, even though I know how. The how is understanding what it is that is stopping them. So is it an assumption? Is it an underlying belief? Is it a fear, or effectively an emotion, or a fear of emotions? So that could be a fear of their own emotions. I don't want to feel uncomfortable. I don't want to be in a position where I'm having to, I get a terrible reaction, or my my breathing changes. I don't want to be in that position. But the irony there is that by not having the conversation, we remain anxious. We remain awake in the middle of the night. All of those things remain. And then it could be a fear of how the other person will react. So their emotional response. I don't want to make somebody feel uncomfortable. I don't want them to have an emotional response. So that the first things we're uncovering is it the emotions, and then uncovering, are there limiting assumptions or beliefs that sit beneath that. So I'm assuming that John is going to blow up and be very angry and aggressive if I raise this. I'm assuming that John thinks this. Is it true? I don't know. I don't know how John is going to respond. I don't know what John thinks. So if we don't know that, what could we assume instead? So we work to just flip those to help them to think about what could be more true and what is most important. I think within that, then there is the perspective taking. So what's the short-term impact of me having the conversation? Yeah, maybe it will be a little bit awkward or difficult, but what's the long-term impact? And what's the short-term impact from a negative perspective of me having the conversation or not having the conversation? So short-term, I feel a little bit easier. It's off my to-do list. I don't have to do it. Long-term, it may well get more tricky. So yeah, that's the starting point. I'll pause there to see if you've got any thoughts or reflections on that as a starting point for tricky conversations.
Um, I'm like really trying to like do coach mode and listen because I'm so
And I
excited
think it'd
to,
be great to see your perspective, Caroline.
yeah, no, because there's everything that you were saying really, really resonates. And just because my next question is then, but how again, like how do we make time to understand what's stopping us? Because that is such an easy question to ask. And actually, well, we both know that to really think through what's stopping us, it's so easy to not give that enough time to really understand it, and the process that's required to dig underneath that requires practice. And it just reminds me of a conversation the other day that I was having when someone said something and I was like, but what's underneath that? And like they heard that, because they're not in a coaching space very often, they heard that as a real big challenge and went, there's nothing underneath it, I'm not meaning anything. They thought that I was asking for like, are you manipulating, like is there something, are you asking that question to like seek, do you know, like to stealthily get to something else? And it took, even just with that person that I know quite well, to go, no, like what if we're like, there's going to be something underneath it and something underneath it, and that's okay. And that we can get to calm around that, to understand what's stopping us, and to understand what's the benefit of addressing that thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's difficult. And I suppose then the question that comes up for me then is, it's hard enough to have a tricky conversation with someone else who's really invested in having making a good kind of outcome from a tricky conversation. But most of the general population are not, like, they're not coaches, they're not sitting there practicing this stuff and reading all the self-development and stuff. And what are your tips when that conversation, when actually the worst scenario does happen?
Yeah, good question. So I think firstly, just going back to how do you help someone to uncover in order to have the conversation? So I think that we're going to say this is coaching and listening and giving attention. So if you manage someone who you know needs to have a tricky conversation, just giving them you need to have the conversation. I've got a really good formula for you to give, to use. Follow this formula, say this first, do this, do that. It's not going to work, because that person will fumble on the script and won't feel emotionally invested. So us giving attention to the person who needs to have the difficult conversation is key, so that they can come to their own conclusions. We need to be driven by our own desire for the outcome. And you and I know that as coaches, rather than being told what to do. And then when it comes to how the conversation will be received, an ideal scenario would be that you have taken a coaching approach and you have empowered someone to think for themselves. And I did a little diagram. I think sometimes with really tricky conversations, the first step is to communicate with clarity first, because we don't want to get derailed by the other person's thoughts, and they might derail things because of lots of reasons. So to get it up front, this is what I need to talk to you about. This is the issue. This is what I've noticed. This is what I expect. Then to ask them to reflect. And it's key in that moment to not be defensive, but just to allow that person to really reflect and think. And there may be emotions, heightened emotions, but enabling them to say, I'm listening to your response. I'm not going to respond back. I will just listen and give you attention. So that's one strategy, where you know you've said it up front and then you're listening. And then another approach, which is an ideal scenario, would be to ask that person for their reflections on a situation and giving them attention, not with that desire to say what you're going to say, but really, really listening to understand and with curiosity before you then share your thoughts and reflections. So there are two options, and different scenarios, I think, require a different approach. But I'd say foundational to any tricky conversation is the level of trust that you have between the individual. And again, it's all like, oh, that's easy to say, Emily. How do you build trust? And as we were talking before we went live, is that building trust or even building understanding around all of this it does take time. It's in those micro moments. It's doing what you say you'll do. It's being true to yourself, or being authentic, or saying, well, I've had trouble with this as well, and this is how I overcame it. It's all those small little moments that really, really matter. And one of the questions I ask people when they're reflecting on being a quote unquote leader is, yeah, how do you want to show up this week? What are the behaviours that you need to dial up this week that are authentic to you, that align with your values and what matters most to you? You've got this tricky conversation coming up. How do you need to be? So really focusing on our behaviours, not just in the conversation, but in how we email people, in how we treat people with respect, in how we show up at a meeting, arriving on time. All of those things, I think, accumulate. So it's what's happening around the conversation is as important as what's happening in that moment in the conversation, or that builds to mean that conversation is more impactful.
Yeah, that's really important, particularly in that leadership space, that right at the start we were saying that the leaders are often they value being kind, being seen as kind, and delivering on that, and that the kindest thing here can be to be clear, but also that be like consistent behavior, not like super friendly and casual all the time until that moment of the conversation that they're avoiding, and then all of a sudden flip into, well, the contract says this, so we have to do that. And because that really jeopardizes the trust, it jeopardizes the possibility of it being a really fruitful conversation, doesn't it? And yeah, again, every example that's coming up, I'm thinking, oh, that time, like we see these all the time. And that, I think, for me, is why it's so important to start like opening up this topic, because the examples that are more normalized are often not done so well.
Yeah. And I think there's something around having confidence to having smaller, tricky conversations. So that could be giving feedback little and often, both the more constructive and the positive. How are we just baking that into all of our conversations rather than waiting for, oh gosh, I've got to give this really difficult piece of feedback to somebody and I haven't been doing it on a regular basis. So, as every conversation could be an opportunity to lay the foundations for what we might call tricky. And I was chatting to someone else actually about this topic, and they talked about the idea of hopeful conversations.
Nice.
Which I really loved, that actually out of this conversation we might find hope, we might find a solution, we might find something positive, something new. Like, what am I going to learn from this conversation as the person delivering it? But if we've created a culture where the people that we're working with are open to learning, that's really key. I've been reflecting a lot about feedback, and recently I've received quite a lot of feedback, some of it more challenging than I would like. And it's been a really good learning exercise for me, because I've noticed that discomfort in feeling the feedback. So why am I feeling uncomfortable? You know, it's about my identity, all of the things that it might uncover. And also understanding the perspective of the person giving the feedback. So our role, if you're a leader, is to is to seek the perspective of the other person. But equally, that's a two-way thing. It's not a one-way transaction. And again, so if we're building that sense of empathy and understanding emotional intelligence or emotional agility in our workplaces, then people are going to go, oh yeah, I know Emily needs to have this conversation with me because I understand that it's important for the team to be coherent, or we've got to hit this target, or whatever. They're going to have much more empathy for themselves and the other person. So I'd actually never thought about it like that, this mutuality in how we approach that. We come as equals to those conversations, both parties ready to learn from each other.
Yeah, that's really empowering, isn't it? Because it's so easy for a hierarchy within the conversation that even at the start you were saying, well, hierarchies exist, but we're like, sometimes that isn't the most useful thing. But in that conversation, each person's valid. And the thing that's coming up for me at the moment is there's a hotel lobby that I often do some work in because it's got a car charger outside and it's like a really handy location. But the number of times when I've just been working in their cafe, and like it has a conference centre, so lots of businesses use it. Often at lunchtime, there'll be a table near me where they're doing a disciplinary in the middle of the cafe. And I don't think it's the same company every time. I just think there's something about the way that work is now structured with so many people like not co-located, that they take that opportunity. And yeah, like I think that's an extreme example, but like just respecting everybody in the conversation, and like people, no surprises, like people being like yeah, there's some real basics that I think are maybe being lost because the way we worked in the past didn't require us to be so explicit about all of the context. But yeah, coming to it with equality of humanity, even if there's a big seniority gap, means there's much more chance of a hopeful outcome.
Yeah.
And as you were talking, I was really thinking, oh, like I've been framing this whole strand as mainly tricky conversations, but I've also got kind of, are they hard? Are they difficult? Are they awkward? Are they? And actually, most of those words you've used, and I think hopeful as an outcome, I like much more, but I am wondering whether to frame it more as brave conversations. Because the minute you label it as it's going to be tricky, like you've taken a step back, haven't you? Whereas being brave together is much more positive. It's much more useful.
Yeah. Yeah. Or it could be, I often also talk about courageous conversations, and I love the word encouragement, and in the word encouragement is the word courage.
Yeah.
And I think the idea that it is courageous, but it's also encouraging, that we are providing courage and building somebody up, that after the conversation, the outcome is better than where we are now for them and for you, for the organization, whatever it is that we are getting, by having the conversation, we are getting to a better place. And I suppose I reflect on these conversations when I had to have them, you know, particularly like performance management conversations. It just felt like I had to do them, and it was a negative outcome was inevitable. But you know, what if we believe that a positive outcome is the outcome? And that might be someone leaving an organization in a performance management conversation, but that might be the best thing for them and what we want them what we want is that to be a positive, encouraging, supportive experience where someone is empowered and enabled to grow and and to move forward. Yeah.
Yeah, because that is real. Like sometimes the outcome does on paper look negative. Like if somebody hadn't come into the conversation planning to leave and by the end of it needs to, that happens. But actually it can happen in a way that is the most positive version of that. And I've never noticed that framing of encouragement, because it literally can mean to make more courageous, right?
Yeah.
Like, and for both parties to have an encouragement conversation that is about both becoming more courageous.
Yeah.
Um,
How exciting is that?
that's really exciting, and a conversation about what you watched on telly last week, like kind or lovely or pleasant as it might be, is never going to be. It's never going to make you more courageous at the end.
No. Yeah. It's kind of chit chat, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, as we talk, I think, or I come to the conclusion more and more, maybe it's a cop out. I'd be interested in what your listeners say. 90% of it is our mindset towards this. Anyone can Google how to have a difficult conversation, tricky conversation, whatever prefix we want. And there are formulas and formats, and they're all brilliant, and some formats work better for others and so on. But if our mind is fixed about how the conversation is going to go, the way we come across, our emotions, our energy, all of that is going to make it really tricky. And similarly for the receiver. So how can we shift our mindset, and how can we help the other person to shift their mindset before the conversation all the time? And what needs to be in place? And I think one of those things, encouragement, you talked about, having a performance conversation, disciplinary conversation in a cafe. Well, let's think about where we have meetings where do we have these conversations? Face to face, in a private setting, maybe, or in nature. I don't know. There's lots of different options, but maybe a public cafe is not the best place.
No, it's not. So I'm gonna draw this conversation to a close, because I don't want to take all of your day, and this has been super, super helpful. For me, some of the tips that I've taken was starting by like really self-examining what's stopping you.
Yeah.
Building a context of trust consistently, and then maintaining that trust within the conversation that feels more difficult than the other conversations that you typically have. So just staying consistent, giving yourself as a leader the space to prepare, and I know it was my words, but like that, not bringing surprises right into the middle, into that conversation, feels important as part of that. Is there anything that I've missed?
I don't think, from what we've said, the final thought I would have would be around the idea of there are two options. One, is this something where I do need to be really clear up front, and the benefit of being clear up front when you're having the conversation, and then allowing space to listen. And then the other option, which is listening first before you speak. So there's no one right way, but I think it's reflecting on those two options is key. Would be my third tip.
Thank you. And I should have asked, what have I missed? Not, is there anything I should have missed? So, and the thing that I missed is that two options. Do I need to listen first or talk first?
Yeah.
So thank you, Emily. Tell people how they can find you, and what they're going to find when they come there.
So you can find me. My website is. We'll put the links. So complete brain back. You can find me on my website.
Yeah.
I'm also on LinkedIn and on Instagram. And what will you find when you get there? I also have a podcast called Unlocking Potential. I've got a free guide to having difficult conversations that is accessible from my website. And I have wealth of resources. I love talking all things leadership and listening and thinking. I've got a newsletter, so yeah, that's what you'll find. Opportunities to learn more really is what you'll find there.
Amazing. So definitely we'll put the links to the website, the guide for difficult conversations, your podcast, your newsletter, all of the things if they want to find out more from you. Thank you so much. And thank you for listening to the start of this new podcast. I hope that it's useful. Thanks for joining us on our inquiry into difficult, tricky and brave conversations. Please like and subscribe and join the conversation over at theripl.substack.com. That's THERIPL.substack.com.